Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce. It's Ukraine War news update for the 27th of August 2023, and we'll go straight to the frontline segment of that. Quite a bit of analysis to do with what's going on, particularly around the Robotina sector. So if we look at the whole front line, northeast down to the south here, where we have Zaporizhia onto Donetsk, there seems to be an operational pause in Velika Novosilka. Everything is about what's happening around Robotina. So Robotina down south to Novopokrovka, along to Verbove, and even up to Novopokrovka there, but also the mention of the Polohy direction. So Polohy is a major place. It's a bit of a logistics hub, somewhat like Tokmak in a way, but Polohy has been able to be struck. It's a lot closer to the front line for some time. So anyway, that's the kind of area we're going to be talking about as well, Kopani too. Right, let's go to frontline conversations. And before we get there, it's worth talking about this. So Ukraine and Russia are fighting over the Boyko Towers in the Black Sea, British intelligence is saying. Strategically important gas and oil platforms between Crimea and Odessa not only control valuable hydrocarbon resources, but like Snake Island, can be used as forward deployment bases, helipads, and for the placement of long-range missile systems. After the full-scale invasion of the Russian Federation in 2022, Ukraine struck several platforms controlled by the Russians. So you've got Crimea here, you've got the Black Sea, you have Kherson up here, the Dnipro River coming down there, and Odessa over here. So yeah, these are the platforms between kind of Odessa and Crimea. You've got Snake Island, I think, is that Snake Island there? Or it could be here. And then you can see all the boats that are hanging around near Romania there. Anyway, after the full-scale invasion, yeah, the platforms have been struck and several controlled by Russia. In the summary, they claim that both the Russian Federation and Ukraine periodically occupy them with their troops. So there is fighting over these. They are useful. You can set up some missile platforms on these oil rigs, oil platforms themselves, and use them to shoot at various places. So yeah, there is some fighting over that. Right. Okay, if we go to some of the maps, the main map really to look at is the Robotina one, where there have been some gains over to the northeast, according to Poulet Volant, but there's actually been, there's a lot of talk about this kind of area there. The Ukrainians are pressuring all along this sector. Short update from Kenneth Gregg. This is in general. On the front lines, we're making progress in Robotina and Klishchivka, which is south of Bakhmut. At Robotina, deep state map now shows the parts of the Russians' defense line are under our control. This means that we continue to roll up their trenches. The Russians have now started withdrawing units from the contact line to behind the defense fortifications. They have also left Novopokrovka, mostly on foot. So let's go and look at that in on my map. So this is the town to the south of Robotina here. The claim is that they are leaving Novopokrovka. There are some claims that some of the Russians have been hit retreating from there as well. So mostly on foot. Our artillery fired on their few cars with good results. So that's probably dipping into the claim I was just making. Since they have put their own troops in the gap between defense lines 2 and 3 and must be able to supply their line 2, there is no problem with the minefields. After we have taken their positions on the flanks, the offense will be faster. This is exactly what I was talking about. So when we understand that they are fighting on the second line of defense, once they get to that line of defense, the Russians have got back, and if the Ukrainians breach that second line of defense, there will not be huge minefields behind that, because the Russians themselves will be needing to supply their troops all along that second line of defense. And so it's a bit like the kind of first line, but the first line wasn't so strong as this second line, and much larger. Let me go and get a map that shows you this. So this should tell you a little bit more. So we have some of these main lines have been negotiated by the Ukrainians. They've got past them, but actually there'll still be lots of mines in front of this second line of defense, because actually that wasn't a contiguous line particularly. But there were huge amounts of minefields in front of even that line, if you like, that the Ukrainians had lots of trouble negotiating. And as they get through to this second line where the Russians appear to be at now, once they break that, there will be far fewer minefields between these two lines, because this is where the Russians are having to consistently supply their own troops. And so if they had these heavily mined, they'd have very few access points to be able to get stuff to their troops. So this, and they'll blow themselves up more often than not. So this will not be heavily mined, and will only be mined as they retreat and sending stuff over. But I just think that the Ukrainians will gather momentum. If they break this line, it will be much quicker to go from this line to that line and that line to that line than it has been to get to this large defensive line as we see it. The minefields in this whole area here have been incredibly densely packed, and that has been a massive challenge for the Ukrainians. Right, so so that is kind of what is being said here by Kenneth Gregg. So after we have taken their positions on the flanks, the offence will be faster. In addition, we do not currently have a critical shortage of ammunition. We do not have a shortage, which is good. Verbove and Novoprokopivka will be completely under our control within a few days. It's very positive, obviously. After that, there will be regrouping, and the spearheads will go full throttle. Also, at the Rozhny front, we will see action in the coming days. At Klishchivka, the Russians are almost completely driven out of the town. At Kupiansk, there's also no danger, although some media report otherwise. The same preferences I mentioned earlier apply. Okay, interesting stuff. So apparently in Klishchivka, the Ukrainians have made gains through the town. I mean, this was mainly a grey zone, has been for some time. I've been claiming the Russians do not have control over that town. I think the whole town is really a grey zone, but apparently Ukrainians have control over 50% of it, with the Russians maybe in the other 50%. It depends how you define that. Some will say that that is a grey zone. Andrew Perpetua, for example, will say they don't like control it in the way that you might understand its control, but you know, different people say different things. Here we have Defmon saying geolocated Ukrainian progress through Klishchivka means that actually he pushes the Russians back further. Andrew Perpetua has them back on the railway line in that area, so it just depends how you top these things up. Then going down to Robotna, or so really it's only Bakhmut and Robotna that I'm mentioning in this segment. Ukrainian fighters are advancing to the village of Novoprokopivka, next to Robotna in the Melitopol region. The losses of the Russians there are high, according to the spokesperson, so they are forced to urgently transfer troops there from other areas of the front, and we'll talk about that in a second. Okay, another claim here. Big progress today at Tokmak and Verbove front. Says War Frontline. The Ukrainians have cleared and penetrated some of the heavily mined areas along Russia's main line of defense in this area. Key to this are reports from Ukrainian sources that have taken control of one or more key ground lines of communication, so roads basically. Here we have Getty saying the Ukrainians have advanced and consolidated in the direction of Verbova, knocking out Russian troops and taking control of a number of strongholds. The number of Russian counterattacks has increased significantly. Fighting continues on the southern outskirts of Robotna. So this is the idea that they're counterattacking means that they are worried. You know, they're pretty desperate and they want to hold on to this. So this is attacking towards Verbove here, where there appears to be some success. This mapping is out of date. This was my yesterday's map, so it just gives you an understanding of where they might be active, and I'll update that later as needs be. Right. So then moving on to P-Star 11 here saying, since yesterday, there have been field reports that Ukrainians have conquered a key height between Novoprokopivka and Verbove, approximately this red circle there, which would be really significant because actually that is down around here. That is really in between these two settlements. It means the Ukrainians are very much to the east of Novoprokopivka. They might not want to go into Novoprokopivka, but just force the Russians out. And there are some claims, indeed, that the Russians have left or are leaving the settlement. So anyway, he continues. There is no visual evidence of that at the moment, but the height is on the main Russian defensive line. Reportedly, this may jeopardize Russian defense in the area since Novoprokopivka and Verbove stand downhill. In other words, if we go to Andrew Perpetua's map, the claim might well be that it's this area of trenches that the Ukrainians have taken control of. And if we look, has he got the height on here? This is not my map, so I'm not used to it so much. It probably is a height somewhere, but the claim is that that is higher ground than here and here. So if you control the heights here and the trench lines, then you just roll down. This is what Kenneth Gregg was saying, roll down the trenches, and it becomes easier to take the trenches rather than taking the trenches head on in all these different positions. If you're already in the trenches, then you just roll on down there. That would be the claim that is going on here. Just to finish that, Russians seem to have weakened the defense of Kopani to strengthen Novoprokopivka and Verbove with the apparition of new units, mostly assault troops trying to counterattack 7th DSHD in the eastern flank. Also, some reports that Ukrainian positions are just a field away from Novoprokopivka. Okay, just to put that into context, the idea is that in order to protect around here, the Russians have taken troops from Kopani to support this area where the Ukrainians are seeming to be making a breakthrough or have made a breakthrough, and that then leaves Kopani weak, so the Ukrainians can then take advantage of that weakness. Okay. Here we have Global War Monitor saying Ukrainians advance towards Verbove. They are 2.2 kilometers from the town now, so they're just advancing incrementally, getting closer and closer to Verbove. And the question is, have they got across this line here, these trenches? So there's this confluence of trenches in that area that will be could be quite difficult to take. However, if you're moving down the trenches there, then it might make things easier. I don't know. It's just a really big hot mess of trenches in that particular area. Right. Now, this goes back to what Tatargami said yesterday. So he talked about how the Russians do have reinforcements. They do have reserves in this particular area. And he said the reserves are a good VDV, so airborne unit. I was talking about Naval Infantry Brigade, possibly, but no, it appears to be a VDV 76th Guards. Now, as Trentelenko says, this is a useful thread on the Russians committing a major unit to Russian strategic reserves, the 76th Guards Air Assault Division, or the VDV, to stop what looks like a possible Ukrainian breakthrough. And Tatargami says, yes, they discussed Russian reinforcements and reserves in the south, but didn't mention them specifically today. It's safe to say that I was referring to the movement of units from the 76th Guards Air Assault Division from the northeast. So these guys were fighting around Crimea. Now, this then could start leading towards the conclusion that where they were trying, and I was saying this before, right? Is there any point trying to do all this stuff up here to distract the Ukrainians away from doing counteroffensives? But then these guys aren't being able to. It's kind of chicken and the egg, isn't it? These guys aren't able to help defend down where the counteroffensives are. So if the Ukrainians can withstand these attacks by using forces that weren't going to be used for the counteroffensive. This is exactly what I was saying. Sometimes I have imposter syndrome. Do I know what I'm talking about? But it seems like actually this was a coherent, cohesive claim. So I was saying that if they can hold off the forces here with only using home guard and whatever, then it means that these troops aren't being used as effectively as the Russians would like, because they aren't distracting the Ukrainians away from their counterattacks in certain areas. So now we've got this situation where some of the best troops in these areas, in fact, the best troops in the entire front line that are hanging around Crimea, are actually being brought down to help plug the holes that the Ukrainians are breaking through on the southern front line here. And that the Russian attempts to distract just simply haven't worked. Anyway, that's my claim there. So Tatargami saying, I anticipated it would take a few days for the OSINT community to detect and identify them, hence I waited until today. According to Russian military doctrine, at least on paper, the 76th Division is a part of their strategic reserves, underscoring the seriousness of the move. This also goes back to what I was saying before, is when you have people like the 76th, if they were operating on the front line consistently, then they are not even being used as their crack elite troops to do stuff like that, but also to do offensive operations in particular places, like, you know, crack attacks and whatnot. If they're being used as like generic troops, then that tells you an awful lot about what the Russians are doing. I don't know if that's the case, whether the 76th were behind the lines up in the north or what. Anyway, as of now, refraining from additional statements, it's crucial to acknowledge the twofold implications. On the one hand, this strengthens Russian operational capacities. So bringing the 76th VDV airborne to Robotna will strengthen their capacity. On the other hand, their failure, if they fail, it will critically impair their combat-ready reserves for rapid deployment. So this is basically using the last of their reserves, arguably, and certainly the best of their reserves, uh, to plug this gap. This is do or die for the Russians, arguably. Um, Lastly, I want to highlight that the division is comprised of various units. Therefore, it's more accurate to refer to elements of the units of 75th Division. These guys have been attrited over time. There's no knowing actually how much of the division they have operational. This is distinct from the complete division with all its constituent units. Right. Defmon goes on to say the 76th Guards Air Assault Division is considered to be the best unit the Russians have. They should be fairly fresh. They were replaced by other units on the Crimea sector a few months ago. So it appears that actually, no, they're not being drawn from Crimea, but actually they'd already been, um, pulled back into reserves, possibly ahead of this counteroffensive, knowing that the Russians would need to pull on them at some point. The question is, after this, will they have? Who will they have? Is this? Are the Russians relying solely on the 76th to stop the Ukrainians here? And after that, there ain't nothing. Or is this all just part of their reserves? And the question is, would these be the last people Russia would throw into this, or not? Do they have more to draw on, or is this the last throw of the dice in some respects? Now, I don't want to be overly buoyant in terms of where the Ukrainians are at, but I think this could signify that the Russians might not have much left in the tank here. Right. Now we are starting to see souvenirs of these guys. So what happens is when you have fighting in trenches and dead Russians, dead Ukrainians as well, they pull off their badges. So they say, as kind of souvenirs and mementos or whatever. Yeah, but also to tell you, we know that these guys are fighting here. So transferred elements of the VDV 76th Guards Air Assault Division to the Robotny-Tokmak axis. The unit was located on the axis of Crimea and is considered the best division of VDV and part of the strategic reserve of the Russian army. Well, they're starting to get patches from them. All right. This is a really big thread. Tatragami has put it all in one place, but it's from Alexander Solonko, who is fighting down in the south, I believe. It's a huge thread. I'm going to just dip into some of it. There's a lot of talk about the environment and how easy it is to, it's quite flat, and so that kind of, in the one hand, makes it actually very difficult because you're easy to spot and so on and so forth. But I'm going to talk about the how this also translates into the defenses. So there's a limited number of access roads, logistical routes. Everything's been calibrated and fired upon repeatedly every day. You can certainly be spotted. Carrying out the mission while maintaining complete concealment from the enemy is mostly impossible. There has been a great deal of talk about fortifications and minefields. Every tree line has been dug up. On one stretch of the Mariupol highway, anti-tank fortifications have been installed. We're not just talking about trenches. There's an entire system of trenches, dugouts, and even underground tunnels in some places. In each tree line, there's a network of trenches and firing positions for various weapons, AGS, DSHK, ATGMs. Anti-tank ditches and mine obstacles stretch across the fields, from regular TM and POM mines to more sophisticated ones, all lying in wait for infantry. Once again, it's crucial to emphasize that we're specifically discussing a system of trenches interconnected by passageways and pathways. These pathways facilitate the movement of personnel, weaponry, and ammunition. As for what remains unexcavated, it's mined. All of this must be navigated to make progress forward. For those who are overly smart, scare quotes, and believe that the Ukrainian armed forces took an incredibly long time to drive the Russians out of the village of Robotne, they must have missed the defense system that needed to be overcome in order to push the Russians away from the Mariupol highway and gradually approach the village, encircle it, and finally seize control. Truly, a monumental task has been accomplished. The Russians are establishing firing points, AGS, so these are automatic grenade launchers, heavy machine guns, and so on, and they mine the routes to them. They themselves move along designated paths. Our positions in the liberated territory are surrounded by mines and tripwires. Paths are cleared for ingress, and sappers gradually clear the area. Frequently, the hidden surprises detonate during shelling, triggered by fires that start due to the shelling. Weeds, shrubs, and trees catch fire, setting off tripwires. At times, we ourselves discover and call in sappers to clear specific areas. So it takes an awful long time to sort this out. There's much talk about armoured vehicle losses, but the issue of initial setbacks is overlooked. In the long run, it's impossible to entirely avoid armour losses. even due to the enemy's advantage in the air. However, armor serves a specific purpose. That entails risk. He goes on to say, these actions are justified by the fact that they save lives. I spoke with a soldier who survived 2 direct hits on a Bradley during shelling. Even the most critically damaged equipment is recovered and taken for repairs. You can replace a piece of metal, even if it's expensive, but you can't repair a human life. This is really significant. We've heard about this a lot, that actually the Western equipment is saving lives, and those lives are then able to fight again. A guy that's been hit 2 direct hits on a Bradley and he's still fighting, right? It's talked about how they're hit by ATGMs, KAB. He's talking about one of the biggest fears of the guided bombs, the KABs from aviation, that they cause a huge issue. Aerial reconnaissance linked from Orlan, Zala, and Supercam is effective in causing issues. Recaptured positions are even more calibrated. Bombs are not spared. No lack of mines either. The tree line where one of the crews was operating was simply leveled. Only a palisade remained, and a well-made trench ceased to be usable. So they flatten them with these guide bombs and so on and so forth. And it's really interesting analysis. This I understand why the Russians are intensively butthurt due to the loss of the village with 6 streets. This is Robotna. They put in significant effort to prevent the Ukrainian forces from advancing. Defending is easier according to all norms. So it is easier for the Russians to defend than the Ukrainians to attack. Of course, the Russians don't have to deal with their own minefields, for example. But here, on the other hand, we're putting in a tremendous effort to break through, and when we succeed, it shows that our efforts are paying off. Anyway, so much more to take from that massive thread of observations there. Really good stuff. The latest is, and this has come from Defmon, Russian Telegram sources are talking about the Ukrainian assaults in both Kopani and Verbovy. So actually east and west of Robotna there. Another channel asked for information about 80 Ukrainian vehicles accumulating for an attack. This is all rumors at this point. He goes on to say, this is from Russian Telegram channels, but breakthrough of the Ukrainians in Verbovy, Polohi district. Destroy them, brothers, says the Russian. Then we need any information about the equipment at the Armed Forces of Ukraine, which is located in the approaches of the settlement of Robotna. The enemy redirected 80 units from other directions. You can transfer all the information to our bot. So they're desperate for information. These Russian, they do a lot of communication through Telegram, as we'll come on to in a second. So on and so forth. Then we have so that's the latest there. I was going to say, he goes on to say, he says, Defmon says, even if one channel reported a breakthrough around Verbovit, I don't really see any panic in Russian Telegram channels. So he is reporting that from one Telegram channel, but actually he's saying, look, hang on, it might not be as big as you think, or as panicked as you think for the Russians. But there are claims that there is a breakthrough in the Polohi area. So that's probably Verbove, one would think, Kopani under pressure. So I think, today and the next week is going to be massive. This could be the crux of the counteroffensive taking place, or I could be overblowing it. Who knows? Right. Then we're going to go on to just look really quickly. I'll save this for my frontline update, actually, I think. Right, we'll move on to the rest of the news. But there's a lot of talk about what was going on with the 205th, this group of troops who were kind of caught in Kherson, Russian troops who were then surrounded, and they're all basically killed or wounded, and they had to come back across somewhere near Kazachi Lahiri. And there's been a lot of fallout to that, and the Russians are then doing some counter narrative to that, but it was a really bad look for the Russians, and they lost a lot of troops and whatnot. Anyway, going on to military aid now, and I have just one tab for military aid, so there's no news in the last 24 hours of stuff going either way. Other than this, and this is building on what I said the other day. So Russia's regime arrested 540 people in Krasnodar in a raid. The months-long ongoing nationwide operation consists of arresting immigrants, both documented and undocumented. So this is, again, what I've reported, fabricating criminal charges and conscripting them into the army to fight in Ukraine. So this is arguably then 540 people that they can just throw at the front line. Now, these guys might end up being really untrained with not very good equipment, but they are boots on the ground. Will they have high morale? No. Will they have high training? No. But will they be firing at the Ukrainians if the Ukrainians are running at them? Arguably, yes. So this kind of crypto mobilization is taking place. We've seen lots of evidence of it. I assume the truth here of them actually ending up going to the Russian army. I'd imagine the Russians are desperate for troops for a mobilization without calling it publicly. Right, that's the end of military aid. I mean, there's nothing else to say at the moment. That's the quietest day I've seen for that topic. Right, onto geopolitics. The G7 and NATO countries have always known that the offensive of the armed forces is a long progress. We are ready for it. Trudeau giving some strong rhetoric here. So Justin Trudeau, the not French, the Canadian Prime Minister, we are ready to support Ukraine as much as necessary because we cannot and must not allow Russia to win. So this is strong rhetoric. Canada are one of the big helpers. Some people say they could help more. They have a lot of Ukrainian. They have a big Ukrainian diaspora community in Canada, and they are helping. In fact, Rochelle, they make the Senator mine-resistant ambush protection vehicle, or they might just be APCs actually. Anyway, they have given a load to Ukraine because actually it is a company that is run, I think, by a Canadian Ukrainian, and I think they employ a bunch of Ukrainians there. They've employed a number of refugees, I think, possibly from Ukraine. So there is this connection between Canada and Ukraine, and Trudeau speaking to that there. Estonian Prime Minister Kaja Kallas faces resignation over her husband's ties to Russia. It turned out their husband, Arvo Halik, continued to do business in Russia. The Estonian opposition is demanding the resignation of the Prime Minister. This is such a common occurrence where money does so much work, doesn't it? People can say that they are morally in any given position, but and I'm not saying I would be any different. I don't know how I would act, right? No, I think I'd be. I have a strong moral core that goes through everything I do, but however, like you think about this for yourself with all of us. If we're saying, oh, I'm dead against the Ukrainian army, I'm dead against this, sorry, the Russian army and what they're doing in Ukraine, etc., etc. And you said, right, and I'm doing all this, and I'm saying all the right things, but actually, I've got a business that does do some business with Russia through the back door, through here and there, and actually, that's netting me $1 million this year, right? Say, would I just cut off me getting $1 million, for the right moral reason? I hope I would do that, but you can understand how this kind of situation happens because people are driven by money, greed. Of course they are. It's human nature. So I'm not justifying this. In fact, I'm strongly criticizing it, and I hope something happens about this. But I understand how it happens, is what I'm saying. The Estonian opposition is demanding the resignation of the Prime Minister. Kallas herself says she is not involved in her husband's business, and the company Stark Logistics, which is partly owned by her husband, assures that it will stop working with Russia in September. Halleck himself promises to sell all his shares in the company. I bet there's all sorts of stuff like this happening, you know, goodness me, our Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, who is like a gazillionaire or whatever. No surprise there, but his wife it has massive business interests, and they've just done a trade deal with India where she's looking to benefit hugely. It's like, okay, is that corruption? Arguably, insider trading or vested interests or quid pro quo or all these sorts of things. I mean, that is happening at the very top of British politics. So there you go. But I won't get sidetracked. Now, I love me a bit of Zelensky, right? He's got the right mix of humanity, realpolitik, charisma, political gravitas, humor. He's just got a right mix of everything. He's bloody hardworking, all of this stuff. Here, he nails it again. It's just fabulous. So, what's the quote? Let's read the quote from Mario Drutska here, saying, "When you have to constantly shake hands and hug everyone at every meeting, but she is your first and only lady. Our president is the best," she says. And this is Zelensky walking past people, and then his wife clocks his wife, and then it's just great. Let's have less of the music. Let's start that again, though. Oh, hello. Ah, just just little things like that make you go, yeah, Zelensky's cool. I like him. He's a decent human being, and it's all builds up a persona and a public image. And yeah, it's great. And then you get people like this sharing that on Twitter, and these things go viral, and it all builds into that same thing. It's, if you can succeed in doing stuff like this, then that's half the job of being a popular politician. Right, this is apropos to nothing. This is my last bit, but I talked about how we need to wean ourselves off hydrocarbons, not just from an environmental point of view, although I believe that really strongly, but actually from a sound business point of view, but look into the future. Like, you know, don't get on board with old tech. Get on board with new tech, which is going to be the future. Whether you like it or not, hydrocarbons will be consigned to historical dustbin eventually, right? So, it's how well prepared are you for that? Uh, but also in terms of energy security, right? If you're relying on hydrocarbons, which are only found in certain areas of the world, then you are beholden to those places in some way, and they have a leverage over you. So if you want to get away from that and be energy independent, then that's a good thing. And lots of people have said, yeah, but renewables, then there's not enough to throw into the mix, and you need more. And yeah, if you need heavy industry working, then you are going to need nuclear in there for sure. I'm not someone who's so green that the greens are split and have been for a long time with nuclear. You have some who are totally anti it, and so some that are totally for it, and realise that actually, if you want a carbon neutral future, then nuclear's got to be part of that in your energy mix. Anyway, I just thought this was interesting. Portugal's electricity mix this afternoon. So 61% wind power, 21% solar, 6% biomass, 3% hydro. That is 91% renewable energy from as the entire country. So can you do it? Yeah, you can. Does that work in winter? Maybe not so much. Maybe you need to have some nuclear doing some work there as well. Can we get ourselves off hydrocarbons for environmental reasons, but for energy security reasons? So we're not relying on Saudi Arabia, UAE, BRICS, basically, Russia, so on and so forth. We need to do that. Can it be done? Yes, it can. Portugal have done a pretty good job there. So anyway, I thought I'd just throw that in. Anyway, thanks so much for your support. Thank you for watching. Please take care. Toodle pips. I'll speak to you soon.